Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay, thank you. Hi everyone, thank you so much Townley for that beautiful introduction. I want to start right off the bat with an exercise. So I would love it if you could grab a piece of paper, if you're able, and a pen, or a crayon, or whatever. And on the bottom right corner of the piece of paper, I would like you to draw a medium-sized box. Label that box compost, please. And then in that box, I would like you to write everything that you're dealing with that's kind of crappy. So you didn't sleep well last night, you don't like your haircut, you got in a fight with your spouse, whatever. All the crappy things. Okay, do we have our crappy things? Usually that's pretty easy to come up with. Okay, so those are inside the box. Now on the rest of the paper, I would like you to try listing anything that has happened in the last 24 hours, or even just this morning, that gives you a little blast of joy. These can be really, really tiny. So I'm currently wearing my favorite socks, and I can feel them in my shoes. That's one of mine. These little fidgets can also be, this is my new favorite thing, can also be a tiny little joy. Okay, now that you have hopefully a little list of those things, it's okay if you only have 2 or 3. I want you to sit with one of them or 2 of them for just 10 seconds. And as you sit with that joy, I want you to really try to savor it, like you're almost like you're taking a sip of it. Where do you feel it in your body? What does it do? Does anyone want to share 1 or 2? You can just shout them out. The funnier, the better.
The smell of my cat.
The smell of your cat. I've never heard anybody say that. I love that. I love that. Okay, thank you.
Surprise sparklers.
Surprise sparklers. Oh, that's great.
Time to make my smoothie.
Time to make my smoothie. Key. What else?
My granddaughter woke up and did me.
Love it. Anyone else?
Good coffee.
Good coffee, yes. Yeah.
I got to play peekaboo with my 11-month-old grandson this morning over a box of Cheerios.
Oh.
I'm still picturing his face.
Peekaboo with an 11-month-old. That's adorable.
Laughing with my wife.
What'd you say? Laughing with your wife. Oh, I love that. Counting on your mom to take kids to school. I love it. Did somebody say compost?
Yeah, eating tacos.
Tacos. Yes. I love it.
My little sister woke up and said, "Yay, Emmy's awake," and gave me a huge hug.
Oh, God, that's so cute. Little kids are really good at joy. Okay, we're going to come back to this. This is a joy practice called Tiny Little Joys. Is this too loud? Am I too loud? Okay. I want to start in kind of a strange place with a bunch of things that science has gotten wrong in the past. The first is miasma theory. So before we knew where germs came from, we had to come up with some hypothesis as to how we got disease. Scientists believed for a very long period of time that toxic fumes came up from the ground, swamps and cemeteries, and were carried through the air, and that's how we got disease. Miasma theory. Scientists also used to believe that you couldn't travel more than 30 miles an hour, because if you did that, the air rushing by you would actually suffocate you. And they thought that train travel was dangerous for the brain. The rattling and the sound would actually rattle the nerves and could drive someone mad. So train madness used to be a disease that we believed in. This one is my favorite. Spontaneous generation. It used to be believed that you could place dirty underwear in a bucket with some wheat grains, and overnight you would generate mice. The spontaneous generation. These are all real things that scientists used to actually believe. These are funny examples, and the point, of course, is not to say that science is bad. That's not why we're here. Getting things wrong is actually one of the things that science does, right? This is what the scientific method is based on. You have a hypothesis, you test it, you analyze the data, you report conclusions, and then you question those conclusions so you can get a better hypothesis. Here's another example. This only works, though, when you update the science and the societal beliefs that come with that science. It's really easy to see this with things like spontaneous generation. You can both see what the scientists were thinking and also how wrong they were. But there are some old, bad scientific beliefs that we still carry pieces of. In ancient Greece, physicians who were trying to treat women who were suffering from really intense anxiety and inexplicable symptoms that came along with that, thought that the symptoms were because the uterus went a-wanderin' through the body, and that it had to be restored to its rightful place in order to minimize the symptoms. I will leave it to your imagination as to how that was done. This belief, believe it or not, held on from ancient Greece all the way until the late 1800s, which is when Vichy Springs was building their pool, and that's wild to me. That's when researchers found out that these symptoms, number one, could indeed happen to men, right? Men can be anxious as well. And so it couldn't be a result of a uterus gone wandering because men don't have those. And was likely the result of a traumatic experience that had not been processed properly and continued to come forward and relived instead of remembered. So just as miasma theory gave way to germ theory, our understanding of trauma has transformed significantly, thankfully, right? And there are ways in which we haven't updated our beliefs. Because we still think that if you suffer after a traumatic event, that this means you are weak, broken, or disordered. Or that if you come from traumatic circumstances, that you will be weak, broken, or disordered. None of that is true. None of it. What the science actually shows is that the trauma response is an adaptive response to threat. What that means is that at its base, it is a sign of function and strength, not weakness or disorder. It is high time to update our understanding. When we understand trauma in the way that science does, societally, three major things shift. Number one, we stop condemning ourselves for the symptoms. We stop condemning other people for the symptoms. Number two, we let go of the shame surrounding those symptoms that may linger after the stressor. And three, we can open the door to understanding the trauma response, which then gives us the empowerment to intervene when the symptoms of the trauma response get in the way. Are we traumatized in 2024? Yes. Are the children in our schools and in our foster care and homes traumatized in 2024? Yes. Does this mean we are broken? No. Does it mean there's no hope? Absolutely not. But in order for us to find and use that hope, we have to be willing to tell a different story about the nature of trauma. Because the story that we tell about something has an incredible capacity to transform the experience of it. There's a story that you may have heard before of two salesmen. They both traveled to the same village in the 1900s to see if there was an opportunity to sell shoes. Both of them wrote a telegram home at the end of their first day. The first one wrote, "Situation hopeless. They don't wear shoes." The second one wrote, "Glorious opportunity. They don't have shoes yet." We have two choices. We can keep telling ourselves a story that says we are traumatized and therefore broken, and that's what will be true. Or, just for today, we could tell ourselves that the things we go through provide an opportunity rather than a hopeless situation. I think we should do that. Okay, I have 4 things, very small things, I want to do today in an hour. The first is to obliterate the definition of trauma that you currently hold and replace it with one that is correct and based on current neuroscience. The second is to get you to see exactly how the trauma response is a sign of strength rather than weakness, so you can understand where the symptoms come from and also what to do about them. Third, I want to bring in the neuroscience of joy, hope, and awe so that you can see the scientific proof and power of positive experiences. And then 4, I want to make sure to give you tools and practices that you can easily fold into your everyday lives, no matter what is going on, that will help you rewire your brain and reorient your worldview, as well as anyone who is around you. Does that sound good? Yes, okay. Let's start with the definition. So the clinical definition of trauma specifies that there are exactly 3 things, and 3 things only, that can count as traumatic: death or threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, or actual or threatened sexual violence. That's it. We could spend the rest of our time together trying to make a better list, but we would still be kind of approaching the problem from the wrong perspective. Because here's the thing, there's not a list of things that are traumatic and a list of things that are not. Trauma is not in the event at all. It's in the way the event lands in the nervous system of the person living through it. Trauma happens when our bodies get so overwhelmed that they switch on our emergency coping systems. And again, those emergency coping systems are a strength response. This can happen because of something that wouldn't really register in our brains as potentially traumatic, and it can also not happen in the presence of something that we would label as traumatic. So one of the things that I'm really proud of in Unbroken is the case studies, because they show you how varied traumatic stressors can be. And in one of the chapters, I talk about my experience with a woman who came to see me. She had all the symptoms of PTSD and was really suffering. She worked as a first responder, and the assumption was that the job was creating the symptoms. But it didn't seem to add up to me, because whenever she talked about her job, she lit up. And so we spent a couple of months, and I was telling her about the trauma response and why she might be having the symptoms in general. And she understood the concepts, but they didn't track with her experience. We could not figure out what was going on. And she had mentioned a breakup in passing a couple of times. And one night I was like, let's just dive into the breakup. And she was like, no, it's not that. It's just a breakup. We weren't even married. We were together for 2 years. It's not a big deal. But I could tell by her face as she was talking about it that there was a lot more to that story. So as soon as we started talking about it, it became very clear that this was the thing that was causing the trauma. She was about to quit her job that she loved because she didn't understand, because society hasn't updated the definition of trauma. We still look at it based on the kinds of events that happen rather than how the event lands. She was ready to quit her job. She had dismissed the breakup as a possible traumatic stressor. Heartbreaking, right? On the flip side, I've had many conversations with people who've been through what we typically do label as traumatic experience, who are not traumatized on the other end of it. Combat veterans who are very well prepared and come home to an emotionally safe space tend to not have lasting trauma. Not because war isn't traumatic, right? But because they were well prepared and had the supportive environment to come home to. So when we try to define trauma based on the type of event, we run the risk of getting it wrong in all directions. When we try to define it based on those events, we dismiss the person's suffering or not suffering. So let's throw out the clinical definition. We need to replace it with a better one because we can't just throw it out. I can't see that. Okay. New definition. In the absolute most simple terms, that was on the last slide, something is potentially traumatic when it overwhelms the nervous system enough to cause our emergency coping systems to kick into gear. Things become lasting trauma when those emergency coping systems don't switch back off. So they either get so overwhelmed and flooded that they stay on, or the switch kind of gets mangled and you can't turn it on and off when you want to. That's what gives us the symptoms of trauma. So here's the new definition of trauma that we're going to use. You have trauma anytime you have an unbearable emotional experience that lacks a relational home. Unbearable emotional experience that lacks a relational home. I'll break this down really quickly. Unbearable raises the bar pretty high so that we don't get to say that everything and anything is traumatic, right? We don't want to do that because we run the risk of sort of stretching the word to meaninglessness. We want to save it for times when we really are switched into these coping mechanisms. Unbearability also maps really nicely onto the neuroscience, which I will talk about in a second, but let me just say this one thing in general. Our experiences, positive, neutral, or negative, all need a dwelling place in order for us to move on. When our experiences are too overwhelming for us to find a dwelling place, we get stuck reliving the trauma. And what we need help to integrate those overwhelming experiences is a relational home. When our brains are triggered by trauma memories, we need to be able to lean on someone else's rational, unflooded mind in order to help us organize the files and find a dwelling place for the experience so that we can move on and stop reliving. When our nervous systems are fried and hyperactive, we need someone else to help us co-regulate. This is where this concept of relational home comes into play. A relational home can be anything. We'll talk more about this towards the end of the presentation, but a relational home in general is any place where someone relates with empathy to a wounded part of us, directly or indirectly. Doing so helps integrate our memories and recalibrate our nervous systems. It's really important when we think about a relational home that we think outside the box. We have the potential for healing all the time in almost every interaction that we have. Anytime we are seen, acknowledged, heard, and validated, healing can happen. The science is incredibly hopeful because it means we don't have to wait to heal. We don't have to wait for the 50 minutes tops that we have in our therapist's office to heal. Right? When we correctly understand trauma, we can help each other heal all the time and in ways that don't feel overly burdensome. We'll come back to this. First, I want to demystify the trauma response so we can see how it works a little bit. One of the most empowering things, and I think this gets skipped over really too often, one of the most empowering things we can do for healing is understand what's actually going on in our brains and bodies when we are traumatized, and what's actually going on in our brains and bodies when we're dealing with these triggers and memories. This is information we need to start giving children because it will help them understand themselves, manage any symptoms that they might face, and help them cope with future stressors. So I'm going to put it in language that I think is simple enough that you can use it to explain to school-age children. Because when we have a shared language around something, it becomes a whole lot less scary and infinitely easier to navigate. All we need to do is get down 3 areas of the brain. That's it. And then we're going to look at what happens when you have a regular event versus an overwhelming event. You have workbook sheets for each of these parts of the brain. So those are at like the back 3 or 4 pages. Oh, people are already coloring. I love it. It's also a regulation tool to color. So that if you're working with a child who's if this is age appropriate, you can teach them about each part of their brain and how the part works. And this is really helpful because once they know each part, you can start referring to the parts and kind of recruiting them when you need. And we'll explain this. But this can be really helpful when you're trying to modify behavior because you can externalize the behavior to a part of the brain, a little cartoon, which can eliminate shame and help the child feel more empowered when it comes to their own emotions and the behavior that comes out of it that sometimes they don't understand.
MC.
Yes?
If anybody doesn't have them.
Oh, yes. Does anyone not have a workbook? If you raise your hand, Tara will grab one for you. There's 2 or 3 over here. Okay. Yeah. Okay, first up is the teacher, the prefrontal cortex. You can think of the prefrontal cortex like your favorite teacher. Everyone has a favorite teacher. Take a moment, think of your favorite teacher. Mine was my kindergarten teacher, Miss Skolsky, who I'm still friends with on Facebook. This part of the brain oversees rational thought, thinking, concentrating, working memory, and its superpower is organizing and thinking rationally. So you can tell kids that they know that this part of the brain is active anytime they're doing something that requires that they pay attention and concentrate. So when they're drawing something, when they're listening to their teacher at school, reading a story, playing a game, watching a show, teaching their friend something, that's when the teacher, the prefrontal cortex, is in front of the room. Next is the smoke alarm, or the amygdala. It is responsible for emotional regulation, motivation, and all these other things. But for our purposes today, its main job is to detect threat, just like a smoke alarm. I'm sure there's a smoke alarm in this room somewhere. That's job is to detect threat. Anytime it senses danger from any source, it sets off an alarm that triggers a response in the rest of your brain and body in the same way that a smoke alarm in your house would trigger you to get up and leave. My little nephew, Henry, we were at an Airbnb and the smoke alarm went off and we couldn't get it to turn off. And he was really tiny and really overwhelmed by the sound. And for like 6 months, anytime he went into a room, he would scan and find the smoke alarm and then go like this. Alarm. It was very ridiculously cute. There's 2 important things you need to know about the smoke alarm. First, it exists to detect danger. That means that sometimes when our smoke alarm goes off, we end up doing things without really thinking about them first. This is where fight, flight, and freeze responses come in. You catch yourself in the fight, flight, freeze response before you even know that anything detected danger. That's how sophisticated that part of your brain is. It's super helpful to know as an individual what happens when your individual smoke alarm goes off. Because the whole thing happens so fast that we tend to not notice sometimes until we're already in the behavior. Raise your hand if you've experienced this, right? All of a sudden you're snapping at somebody or you're needing to get out of the room when you're having a meeting, you don't even know why. That's because this happens so fast. It totally goes past the teacher. It doesn't stop to check in with the teacher first. The second thing that's really important to know about the smoke alarm is that it can't tell the difference between smoke that comes from fire or smoke that comes from someone smoking a cigarette in the hallway. So it goes off whenever there's any smoke at all. And in the case of the Airbnb, it went off for no reason. That's annoying, right? But we don't want to get rid of the smoke alarm. There's nothing inherently bad about it. In fact, it's our threat detection system and we need it. Just like you need the smoke alarm in your house. If it's going off when you're making pizza crust, that doesn't mean you throw it away, right? You adapt to it, you recalibrate. So it can be incredibly helpful to get kids to think about what happens in their bodies and what their behavior looks like when the smoke alarm is going off. Do they cry? Do they yell? Do they run away? Do they isolate? None of this is anything to be ashamed of. It's really important to tell them that. It's just super helpful to notice. The more awareness they have of this, and if they can find their own language to describe it, that's why you have these worksheet pages in the back, the better, because the more empowered they are. Once they know what's going on, they get a lot of data about the situation that they're in and also what's happening in their body and what to do about it. It's also helpful for them to understand that smoke alarms sometimes go off at the wrong time, and that's totally normal and okay. It does not mean they're broken. The goal is just to notice, not judge, and then make a plan. If you have a child who is able to think about what their teacher is like, you can refer to the teacher when you're talking about the smoke alarm. And so you might say, when you're really upset, it can be really hard to hear the teacher or concentrate, right? That's completely normal and okay. And then you can actually have them visualize walking up to the teacher in their mind and asking for help or a hug. That's like a baby neurofeedback practice that helps them reconnect neurobiologically with the part of the brain they just became disconnected from. Pretty cool. Okay, last up, my personal favorite, the librarian. This is the hippocampus, which is like the librarian of the brain. The hippocampus is in the back of the brain. It's about the size of a walnut. And it's in charge of long-term storage of your memories. This is super cool. Between 4 and 24 hours after any event, your librarian creates a little storybook for what just happened. And it puts in the storybook the narrative, here's the beginning, middle, and end, the emotional content, here's how that felt, and the meaning. What are we going to do with this? Where are we going to put it? So here you can tell the kids that the librarian is always working to file away things that happen to them into these little storybooks, sometimes even while you're sleeping. And you can pull out those stories and look at them together anytime. You can also put them away. And you can even change what's in the stories if you need to. Understanding that we can't necessarily control what happens to us, but we do have a say in the story that we tell about what happens to us is a life-changing skill. It protects kids and adults from getting stuck in victim mentality when the whole world is telling them that they're broken because of where they came from. So, in each storybook, we have the narrative of the event, the emotional content, and then the meaning. So what happened, what did it feel like, and what does it mean? The reason that the hippocampus does this is because it keeps you safe. Memory is really, really useful in terms of navigating the world. We are much more likely to survive when we remember what's dangerous and what's safe. When something scary happens to a kid, which it will, a great exercise that you can do together is to actually make a little file. Make a little storybook with them. Narrative helps us gain an external perspective on an event, and processing it with someone safe gives us that relational home. And also to assign meaning to it. So you could ask them, what do you think should go in that file? Let's tell the story together. What kind of story is it? What emotions did you feel? What emotions do you feel now as you think about it? Where do you think your librarian would want to put this story? Is it really important? Do we want to put it somewhere front and center, or do we want to put it somewhere off to the side? We can do this for each other too, not just kids. This is very useful for adults. Okay, so if you think of all the parts of the brain as a little team, you're going to play your best when all of them are doing what they're supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be doing it. So the teacher is in the classroom teaching, the alarm is in the classroom monitoring, and the librarian is in the library organizing. When you have a regular event and normal things are happening to you, you're here at this conference, you're listening to people talk, you're learning things, taking notes, hanging out with friends and colleagues, right? Hopefully there's no dysregulation, and everything that's happening is getting filed away pretty quickly as it's happening throughout the next day. When all brain systems are online and can communicate, the team plays really well and gets the memory file to the librarian who puts it away. Make sense? Yes. Okay. When you have an overwhelming event, your amygdala detects threat and it turns on the alarm. And then your amazing, incredible nervous system and brain respond by altering function all over your brain and body so that you can be prepared to handle that threat. So the teacher and the librarian run from their spots and they come to help. Everything goes a little haywire, just as it would if the smoke alarm went off at school, right? There's a protocol, everybody runs to the same place. So now your team is all over the place and you're not going to get a coherent storybook for the event. That may sound like a bad adaptation, but I just want to underscore this is an incredibly positive adaptation. If there's an emergency in the school, the teacher doesn't need to be writing assignments on the board. The librarian doesn't need to be making storybooks and putting them away. They need to come help with the emergency, and they do. That's miraculous, not a sign of brokenness. This ability to adapt and alter function is the center of the trauma response. It makes us into superheroes. You can have kids make up their own superhero. Who would they be? What is their trauma response superhero? What does it look like? What does it wear? It keeps us safe, and it does this without our input. We don't need to rationally think about it, it just happens. We spent 150 years thinking that this was a sign of weakness. It is the opposite. And the superpower can have side effects, just like it does in every superhero movie, right? You have to learn how to work with your superpower. So when the teacher and the librarian are helping with the emergencies, not a lot of concentrating happens and not a lot of filing happens. So the really overwhelmed librarian tries to create a storybook file for the event, but it's really disorganized. She doesn't know how to read it or what's in it or where to put it. Inside the file are a bunch of scary emotions, stories that have pieces that don't line up. Maybe they're missing pieces. She doesn't know what they mean. So every time the librarian opens it up, the whole team gets overwhelmed all over again. This is the root of the trauma symptoms that we think of and we use to kind of connect to brokenness. Flashbacks, intrusive memories, anxiety, shutdown, anger. These all come out because the poor librarian is overwhelmed. She doesn't know how to figure out what is in that file and where to put it. All the librarian needs, when we peel away all the shame, is help. When someone who is not overwhelmed can come in and look at the disorganized story, books and files, they can help put some organization to them and help her put them away. When it comes to kids in the foster system, or any kind of tough circumstances for that matter, we focus so much on what's not there, as we should, right? I don't want to minimize that, but we should also help them focus on what is there. This is a great place to help them make a list of who their helpers are. Who would they call on when they're feeling overwhelmed to help them look at one of these files? A sibling, a friend, a teacher, a foster parent, someone in social services that they've connected to. Who would they look to? Okay, coming back to the definition of trauma, notice that nowhere in here did we need to specify what kinds of events cause the response. When we define trauma, we need to use the biology, not the type of event. It doesn't matter what's happening that causes your brain and body to do this. It just matters that it's happening. We need desperately to stop comparing traumas and trying to make hierarchies out of them. It doesn't make sense in the science. Our bodies tell us when we are traumatized, not our minds. And when our bodies tell us that we've been traumatized, this is not a sign that we are broken or should feel shame about that. It just means there's something here we might need help with. When the indicator light goes on in your car, you don't get out of your car and leave it on the road. This is a bad car. I'm ashamed. It should be ashamed of itself, right? That doesn't make sense. You're like, oh, an indicator light comes on. It's a weird sign. I don't know what it means. And so I need to look at the manual and then take it in and have somebody look at it. If we can get kids to understand this about themselves and each other, rather than soaking them in shame, as we do now, the whole world will change. Okay, takeaways. Our brains are miraculously adaptive. That's just what the science says, not even my opinion, it just is. When significant, overwhelming things happen to us, they can leave behind imprints in the form of these disorganized memory files that can cause disruptive symptoms. When we update our understanding away from old and outdated science and embrace the new science, you can see directly, scientifically, that the trauma response is a sign of strength, not weakness. It's not a sign that we are broken, it's a sign that our brains are working. When we empower children to know and understand these parts of the brain, just as we empower them to know and understand their bodies, we are giving them a set of lifelong coping tools that will help them integrate what they've already been through and also anything else that comes up in the future. That's exciting, right? Okay, before we move on, I want to walk through an exercise really quickly. I want you to take 30 seconds and think about the word awe. Write down anything that comes to your mind when you think about the word awe. Like A-W-E, not awe, like, oh, that baby's cute. I mean, that could spark awe too, but free associate. What comes up? Okay. I want you to think about the last thing you experienced that made you feel awe. And write that down. How did that feel in your body? Anyone want to share? Yes. Oh.
My 2-year-old.
Your 2-year-old. Was it something in particular or just?
Just him in general.
Just him in general? That's adorable. How does that feel in your body, that awe?
Like, I want to say like the greatest love, pleasure that you can feel.
Oh, I love that. The greatest love, pleasure you can feel. Anybody else? You had your hand up right here. Yeah.
I put life
Life.
in reading,
Yes.
and it was just to wake up every day. It was
Oh.
awesome.
Just to wake up every day. That's making me want to tear up. Yes. Totally. Anybody else? Yes.
With all the weather that's been happening outside my front window, I can see the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And just every time I look out there and I notice either the fog coming over the mountain or the sun filtering
yeah.
through or the rain, just the different clouds, the way they are, it just brings me awe every moment in that. And I just feel like a real sense of quiet in the moment, and just like look at that. And I do it while I'm driving around town because we live in, and I just am in awe at how beautiful of a place we get to live in.
Right?
So when
Yes.
I'm commuting and stuff,
Yep.
having commuted for years in the city,
Right.
where it took, a 15-minute trip took 45 minutes for
Right.
the traffic, and now a 45-minute trip takes 45 minutes.
Yep.
But it's in a beautiful place.
Yes. I love that. Yes. When I was driving here last night, it was raining and then sunny, and I saw a full rainbow for the first time. Like the end to end. I've never seen that. It was spectacular. And I like shrieked in the car. Like a little kid. Anybody else?
My friend had kittens recently.
Oh.
5 little kittens, and they were just in this little, they're like a day old and they can't see and everything. But the mom was like, you could tell she was just so proud. Like, look what I did. These are my little kittens. I made them,
It's-
just purring and happy. And
Oh, I love that.
it was really sweet.
It's adorable with the little animals when they pop out and they just like start walking around,
She
Like,
knew what to do. I was
yeah.
amazed.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. Okay, I want you next to think about one thing you could look forward to. So take the thing that you wrote down that made you feel awe. How can you reconnect with that in the future? Or something like that. This doesn't have to be big, by the way. We're going to talk about everyday awe, opportunities for everyday awe in a little while. I get it sometimes just from watching documentaries. Like Fantastic Fungi, did anyone see that? Like the trees are talking to each other. Like what? Sharing resources? That's wild. And then I want you to, once you think about how you could connect to it in the future, I want you to commit to that in whatever way you can. So where you could write down a sentence, I'm going to watch that documentary on Earth later tonight, or I'm going to go hang out with the kittens tomorrow, or I'm going to really be in tune and present with the commute and how beautiful it is. You can even put it in your calendar. Okay, we're going to come back to awe, but I want to transition into something that gives me awe, which is the neuroscience on hope and the brain. One of the mistakes we make in trauma healing, this is one of the biggest mistakes, is this assumption that we make that the only healing that happens is when we're sitting in a therapist's office, directly talking through a traumatic event. No doubt, of course, that can be a critical part of healing, but it's also not accessible to everyone, and it doesn't happen all the time. There are also certain traumas, especially those that happen in developmental years before our hippocampus is fully connected, that we don't have concrete memories of. It's a complete myth that we can't heal from those things. We can. Since trauma leaves imprints on the brain, as we've seen, recalibrating the system for hope, resilience, and joy is also a critical part of healing, and it's not one we focus on enough. This is something that can be done nearly all the time, every day, and without having to sit and face traumatic memories. We have actually done this already twice today. Joy and awe are doorways into healing. So the exercise we started out with, Tiny Little Joys, that was to get us grounded here and like in the space, but it's also a regulation tool because it flips on something called the hope circuit, which I'll talk about in a second. And the exercise we just did about awe also flips on the hope circuit. So now the question is, how do these work? Why is this regulating? To understand how this works, we need to think about the brain as a circuit board. So all the different parts of the brain are wired together in circuits. And these circuits are really important because when they fire up, that's what determines our thought process, our belief, or behavior, or all three. And each circuit requires energy in order to work. And our brain doesn't have unlimited energy, except in that movie with Bradley Cooper where he takes that pill and he's infinite or whatever. In some ways, you can think about your brain like an old house, right? So in my house, which has really old electrical wiring, you can't run really any appliances at the same time because a fuse will blow. So the brain is just like that. You can't run all the operations at the same time. There's not enough energy. And there are certain circuits that take a ton of energy. And so by default, they are counterposed, which just means if one is on, the other is off by necessity. You know this already, even if you've never thought about it, because you've definitely experienced it. So if you're sitting at your desk at work and you're using some of your break time to plan your next vacation, and then you get a message that someone has sent you an urgent email about a mistake that you've made, you couldn't go back to concentrating on your vacation planning even if you wanted to, right? You're totally diverted. Neurobiologically, this is because fear inhibits hope. When you get that email, before you're even done reading it, usually by the time you read the subject line, the fear circuit lights up. And we know about the fear circuit already because the amygdala, the smoke alarm, is in the center of it. So it's the circuit that lights up when the alarm goes off and you're ready to respond to danger or threat. Now, we want fear to inhibit hope. That's like a kind of a damning sentence, but we want that to happen, specifically when there's a clear and present danger. So if the smoke alarm in your office is going off, you want the fear circuit to light up because that's what's going to get you to walk away and away from danger. But we don't want it to get stuck there and have fear inhibit hope when there isn't a clear and present danger. This is sometimes what happens when we've had trauma in the past. We started out today talking about some of the things that science has gotten wrong, things that needed sort of further analysis to see if they were true. We used to think that trauma was something that you couldn't heal from. That if your fear circuit was overactive enough, it would just be switched on all the time and you could never recalibrate it. They would call this hardwired. It's a good thing that science is always interrogating itself because it turns out that's not true. What is true, and what we didn't realize until very recently, is that just as fear inhibits hope, hope inhibits fear. Hope also runs on a circuit that takes a lot of energy. And this hope circuit lights up anytime we are feeling connected to others, using our imagination, making decisions, planning for the future, experiencing awe, joy, or gratitude. When I say that it inhibits fear, I mean this neurobiologically. It stops the alarm from going off and also stops the cascade of symptoms and behaviors that come from the alarm going off. So if you've ever distracted a child who's having a tantrum with their favorite cartoon, you're using hope to inhibit fear. even though we wouldn't necessarily call the tantrum from fear, right? It's because of the overactive fear response. The fear circuit's on. And it's the same reason that we sit at home at night and watch stand-up comedies on Netflix, which markedly improve your mood, even though the world hasn't changed while you're watching it, right? The even cooler thing is that this isn't just true in the moment, but it has increased impact over time. So the more you connect to the hope circuit and quiet your overactive fear circuit, the more you rewire your brain and body, the more regulated and calm you will feel and behave. So all of this works for trauma, it works for stress, it works for anxiety, because you're inhibiting the brain areas that are turning those things on. You can actually unstick your stuck emergency coping systems. What this means is that we are much more in charge of our emotional reality than we think. There's of course there's a lot that happens to us that we don't have any say over. Our circumstances largely get handed to us whether we want them or not. There are threats and fears and terrible things that come out of the clear blue sky. But that's not the whole story. The rest of the story is that we have a great deal of say when it comes to how we deal with the circumstances that get set out in front of us. This is true whether we know it or not, but when we empower our children to know it, we have even more of a say. I'm going to cite just one study here because it's like I can't possibly go a whole hour without citing a study. But know that there are many, many studies that have been replicated and continue to show this. So it's not just mapped out in the brain circuitry, it's been proven in the research as well. In one study, participants were divided into 3 groups. And for 10 weeks, one group was instructed to keep a daily journal where they wrote things down they were grateful for or felt happy about. The second group recorded daily hassles. So they just did the compost pile. The third group listed neutral events. The participants in the gratitude and joy group reported significantly higher levels of well-being and life satisfaction. Also, their brain scans revealed that they showed greater activation in parts of the brain associated with the hope circuit. Pretty cool. I've also been working on this with clients who are facing significant trauma, and the results are astonishing, and you can see them very quickly. A few years ago, I had a client named Maya who had an incredibly traumatic loss of a spouse. And so her grief was shockingly overwhelming. And we started, as we were working through the grief, also imprinting joy, using the tiny little joy exercise. And that became a life raft for her. She did it every single day, 3 times a day. Anything from like just feeling the warmth of sun on her skin to a positive interaction with someone to a happy memory of her spouse. Over time, she noticed that this practice of identifying and savoring these little joys helped her brain to re-regulate, which reduced the intensity of her grief, which wasn't that it doesn't erase the grief, it's not that the grief isn't there. It's just that she started to experience moments of like just genuine happiness, and that enabled her to engage more with her community, which helped her to heal. Focusing on joy and gratitude can help rewire the brain towards hope, even in the face of profound loss. Okay, so the takeaway is that these practices change your mood on a neurobiological level by modulating blood flow and electrical activity in your brain. In other words, joyful feeling of gratitude, awe, and hope actually changes your brain. So the current science says, no matter what your circumstances are, or were, the more you can connect to your hope circuit, the more grounded and regulated you will feel. So we've already gone over 2 tools to help turn on the hope circuit, and I'm going to share with you 4 more. So you'll have 6, right? Yes. 6 tools that you can easily fold into your everyday life that will help this. All of these are in front of you in the packet that you have. And all of them are designed to be really simple, repeatable, and kid-friendly. These are all ways to fire up the hope circuit, which will help you diminish symptoms of anxiety and overactive alarm and trauma over time. Okay.
MC.
Yes.
The first 3 pages.
Oh, the first 3 pages. Okay, so they're on the first 3 pages of the workbook. And then the coloring pages are in the back. And those you can use for adults or kids to help you sort of identify and externalize these different parts of your brain. Before we go into this, does anyone have any questions about the science? No? Okay. We'll have time at the end too. So, tiny little joys, we did already in the beginning. This one is super easy to fold into your everyday lives. I highly recommend it. My life changes dramatically when I am doing it, and then again when I'm not. I made a guided journal for this that's available on my website, but you can do this with any piece of paper, any journal that you have. You can do it in the Notes app in your phone, or just out loud. It's a really fun task in the classroom as a grounding exercise. You can do this with students, pick 5, have everyone think of tiny little joy, and then pick 5 to share. That can be really fun. You can do it in the car on the way to school, at the dinner table, anywhere. It also gives you a really great opportunity to learn things about the kids you are interfacing with, because you get a window into their worldview. And you see directly what they're noticing. So not just what they're into, but what they see. Sometimes that's obvious, the stuff that comes up, but sometimes it's a real surprise. Okay, so basically, just to go over this really quickly again, you make a compost pile. So you take the stuff you're dealing with. We have negativity bias in the brain, so we're always going to be able to think of bad things quicker. So you get those out of the way and you put them in a physical little box. They're there. We don't want to diminish it. Tiny Little Joys is not meant to like trump them or erase them or anything like that. They exist right alongside of them. Then you look for tiny little joys. It's okay if this is hard. If this was hard for you this morning because you're having a really dark time right now in your life, that's okay. It takes practice. We are hardwired to imprint negative experiences because they have an evolutionary advantage. If you imprint negative things, you'll avoid them in the future. We have to manually imprint the positive ones. So if you're out of practice, that can feel like a really heavy lift. Try to go as small as you possibly can. What is your favorite flavor of bubbly water? That could be a tiny little joy. So look for them and then imprint them. If you have time to take 10 seconds, you can do this in the car, you can do this at the dinner table, anything, to connect to how they feel in your body. You give the joy a little bit more time to take hold. You're in the hope circuit for a little bit longer. Okay, finding awe. We did a variation on this a couple minutes ago. It's great to do this one for a sustained period of time. So you can do it like for a week at your family or with kids or in school, because that gives you a really time to think about what gives you the feeling of awe and how to connect to it more intentionally. We get out of the practice here. So you could do awe week at school, whatever. And again, this is a place where you can all learn about each other. We don't typically sit down and ask each other when the last time we experienced awe was. Imagine if we did that instead of like, what do you do? How much more you would learn about a person. When we do ask that question, you get a lot of insight into someone's worldview, what lights them up. And once you do like a sustained week on awe and you have an idea of what things spark awe for you, again, if you can't think of anything right now, that's okay. That's not something we value in our society, so we get disconnected. But once you do it for a week, it's really easy to remember that and look to sources. So you can say, I'm having a really dark time. Let me think of the things that give me awe. How can I connect with those things this week? We tend to think of awe as something we can't seek out. It has to happen in these giant experiences, like when you go to the Grand Canyon. Dacher Keltner is a researcher who wrote a book that's just called Awe, The Everyday Science of Awe. That's really wonderful. He's an awe researcher, and he identifies 8 different sources of everyday awe. These are crazy. The first one you would never guess is moral beauty. Moral beauty is what happens anytime you watch someone doing something remarkable. That's the number one source of everyday awe. I just think that's why. That gives me hope in our dark world. So if you're watching like a fireman rescue a cat from a tree, that would be moral beauty. The second one is collective effervescence. What the hell is that? Actually, that was that. Collective effervescence is any time a group is joined together feeling the same thing at the same time. So when everyone or some people in the room laugh, that's collective effervescence. It's like a bubbling. I love that phrase. So going to a yoga class, moving and breathing at the same time, going to a concert or a comedy show or anything that you like to do, a sporting event, sports ball, as I like to call it. Any sort of pick your sports ball. I'm looking at Galen. Anytime you're doing that, like if you do the wave, right, that's collective effervescence. Nature, I would have thought would be first, but it's third on the list. Nature has a way of comforting us and kind of resetting our perspective. It's hard not to feel small and like in the good way when you're looking at the stars on a really clear night. Music. Raise your hand if you've ever had goosebumps from music. Goosebumps are a physiological sign of awe. So if you're totally like befuddled and you have no idea what things give you awe, try to pay attention to what gives you goosebumps. Visual design, art, and architecture captures us and gives us this feeling of transcendence. And so that is something that you can connect to for awe. Spirituality, mysticism, and religion. So this could be like conversion experiences and nirvana, but it can also just be that sort of holy feeling you get when you walk into a spiritual space, even if it's not your religion, right? Life and death is something that sparks awe. It's a miracle to be born. It's a miracle to die. Whenever we are around either, it tends to reset our perspective. And then epiphany. I think this is why we have so many Instagram accounts that are just quotes. Because we all know that feeling when you're scrolling and you're like, oh, that, right? That kind of epiphany is like being awestruck. So in this one, if you find a quiet space, we did this today, you take a couple minutes, think about awe. You're probably out of practice with it. What kinds of things spark awe? Make a list for yourself. And then for an entire week, seek out experiences. Give yourself 10 minutes a day to connect. You don't have to go to the Grand Canyon. You can watch things on YouTube, right? Like how they make cowboy hats is like oddly fascinating. I had no idea. Go watch that on YouTube later tonight. And then whenever you find yourself or put yourself into an awe-striking situation, stop and notice what's happening in your body. And the thing you will notice that will likely compound is there's a physiological response, just like there's a physiological response to fear. I bet you could tell me in 1 second what it feels like in your body when you're anxious, right? Your body also has a response to positive things, we just don't imprint it. So a lot of people probably hadn't thought for a really long time of goosebumps, shivers, tearing up. These are all physiological responses to awe. We're designed to do that. How cool is that? And then 4, if you can, write about it or talk about it. Why did it spark awe? What sorts of questions came up? What sorts of ideas? Don't worry if you're making sense or not, just kind of lean into the experience. Okay, this next one is inspired by my mom. And, and it's one of my favorites. I just have come up with this recently out of a crisis, actually. Has anyone ever heard of the word Freudenfreude? You've probably heard of Schadenfreude.
Very different.
They're very different, yes. So Schadenfreude is what happens when someone trips in front of you and you laugh. It's joy at someone else's pain, Schadenfreude. Freudenfreude is joy at someone else's joy. This tool was inspired by my mother, Suzanne, who was like, if there was an Olympic medal for people watching, she would have won it year after year after year. And I came up with this tool when I was trying to think about how to access joy when you're in a really dark place and you can't feel it yourself. Basically, the idea is just to passively put yourself in front of other people's joy and then see what happens. So get yourself somewhere where there are other people, anywhere. It could be a park, you could do this in a cafe, the mall, anywhere there are other people. If you can't get outside, you can also do this with shows. And your like job here is just to look for other people's joy. How does it show up? What does it look like? What does it walk like? You know when you can tell someone like loves their outfit? That's the best. And they're just like strutting, feeling themselves. And they might not be like laughing and feeling joy, but there's joy in their body with that, you know? Or when two people are like, you can see like a couple, they've just started dating and they're just like, there's no one else in the world except them. And you can see them planning the next thing they're gonna say. Then it lands well and you can see the joy that it landed well in both people. Like that's the best too, right? See what happens when you start thinking about this? As you notice more and more joy, just notice what happens in your body. It's contagious, just like fear. If you're stuck in an elevator, has anyone ever been stuck in an elevator? I have. Yep. The worst possible situation when you're stuck in an elevator is to be stuck in an elevator with someone who's panicking about being stuck in an elevator. Why? Because fear is contagious. But so is joy. Okay. If you've seen me speak before, you will recognize these last two. The first one is supercharged gratitude practice. This is a really powerful one, and it was sparked by my pure hatred for gratitude lists. I recruited the science and made it better. I call it supercharged because it packs double a hope circuit punch. Two of the things that are most likely to fire up the hope circuit reliably are gratitude practice and acts of kindness. So gratitude lists tend to get really boring, and within like 2 days, you're just filling it in, not feeling a thing. Yeah, my family, whatever, right? But this one is more active, and it actually includes communicating with other people, and so I think it's a lot more vivid and sustainable. It also creates relational glue. This is kind of a side effect, because it gives us the opportunity to share with one another what we like and what is going well. We don't do that enough. So here, you just make a list of 3 things you're grateful for that have to do with other people. It could have to do with something that someone did for you. It could be a quality that you admire in them or something you noticed about them that just made you smile. You just make a list of those things. And then starting at the top of the list with each item, you pause for about 30 seconds and sink into the feeling of being around that person, of having them do something for you. And then you do this for each of the things on your list, 30 seconds for each thing. Then here's the brave part. You take one of the things on your list and you turn it into a little note and you send it to the person. Or you tell it to their face. We never do this, but who like wouldn't want to receive a text message that they're admired, or that you could tell they were feeling themselves in their outfit and it made you smile? Because it did look good, right? And the last one is one of my favorites because it's really silly, as am I, but it also packs a huge punch. One of the things that can be really tricky with hope and joy is that there's a natural resistance to them. And there's a lot of reasons for the resistance. But when you're in a really low place, you can actually end up resisting hope and joy without meaning to. You've seen this with people you work with clients, with kids, and in yourselves for sure. You'll push away positive feelings because they feel jarring. Or you'll slip really quickly back into negative thinking because there's a really strong pull to negative thoughts in the brain. So this tool is designed with that in mind. It's also a really powerful way to engage in the imagination, which is something we do not do as adults nearly enough. Kids are a lot better at this, and they can teach us a lot about how to do it. The basic idea here is just to spend some time imagining a future that cannot and does not exist. So this way, you don't bump up against resistance the way that you typically do when you're imagining your own future. So if I ask you to imagine like doing some traveling, you can maybe do that for 10 seconds without worrying about flights and who's going to watch the kids and the pets and the house and all the things, and what if there's another pandemic and I can't take that much time off of work, right? Lots of negative stuff will come up. So the goal here is to imagine as vividly as possible a ridiculous future. I've done this group a lot with a lot of different groups, with myself, with individual clients, and it's almost always hilarious. The crazy thing is that within like 5 days, if you're in a really dark place and you do this for 15 minutes a day, 5 days in a row, you start to actually notice hope in the world again. That like shocked me. So basically, you block off 15 minutes and you just focus on this, do it in the shower, silence your phone, and then dream up a ridiculous life, one that you know is impossible. You can pick a setting from a movie plot, right? So I'm going to be a farmer out here in this lovely land and an astronaut, ballerina. That's wild, right? Enter the life like you're turning on a movie. So as soon as I know to do this, because I've practiced this so much, what am I going to wear? What kinds of clothes work in ballet and in space? Can you do ballet in space? Can you wear a tutu over your spacesuit, right? You see that what happens here is the absurdity enables you to stay connected to your imagination. And none of your real life worries will come and get in the way. Other than these tools, which I hope are helpful, I would love it if you try them, fold them into your daily lives, and see what changes, report back. The thing I want you to walk away from today with is the fact that the story we are telling about something matters a lot. For 150 years, we told ourselves that to be traumatized was to be broken. That these experiences destroyed and damaged our brains. I still see that on TikTok, damn it. That if you had a hard childhood, you were ruined. And for 150 years, we missed the fact that hope is just as powerful as trauma. For 150 years, we missed the hope circuit. It was there the whole time. Right there in our brain, right next to the fear circuit, which we did not miss. If we tell ourselves a story that we are broken, all we see is the brokenness. Has anyone heard of Ellen Langer, the psychologist? Maybe, nobody? She works on mindfulness, and she's wonderful. She's done some incredible research about the way that our beliefs shape our actual experience. And her most famous study is called the counterclockwise study, which you may have heard of. In it, researchers took elderly men who were struggling with their health and moved them into a living situation that mirrored the way they were living when they were 20. So like, what was your college dorm room like? You're 85, I'm gonna move you into your college dorm. In just a week, participants showed significant improvements in all of their health markers. Their physical strength, their flexibility, their memory, cognition, their posture changed. They could pick things up that they couldn't pick up before. In another of her study, researchers inflict a very minor wound on the participants, very minor, and they tell them that the wound is going to heal in about 20 minutes. And they sit them in a room with a big clock, just like that one. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the group, the clock is moving twice as fast as real time. For a third of the group, it's moving twice as slow. And for a third of the group, the clock is correct. Guess what happens? You're going to assume that the wound is going to heal when the wound heals, right? False. The wound healed based on the clock in the room. So the wound heals based on perceived time, not real time. They did the same, they mirrored that study with diabetic patients, and the same thing happened with their insulin levels. Wild, right? Just as Langer's participants experienced physical and cognitive improvements, we can apply a similar principle to our understanding of healing from trauma. All we have to do is actively engage in positive experiences like joy, hope, and awe, and embrace a narrative of strength and resilience. If we do this, we can influence our brain's response to trauma. If we believe the trauma has broken us, if we believe that the kids that we work with are broken because they have sustained trauma, that will be true. If we believe what the science shows us, we will see that we may be wounded, all of us wounded, but we can heal. And we have powerful tools at our disposal no matter what our circumstances are. Thank you so much.